Well, let me a general question. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that bear on it. The Rambam, he hated idolatry, and that was the big thing. You shouldn't have another God. What does he do
Right.
with what about an atheist? Says, I don't believe in any of this nonsense.
Was there such a thing? Or is there, when you look at the, I mean, historically, I mean, atheists would be covered by the category of people that are called heretics. Like if you deny one of the, why is it, this has happened to me before, where can you see how Sifrei Mitzvot, it doesn't let you, it doesn't let you, it's not a link. Why won't it let? That is annoying. All right. Last time it happened, I went to Chabad.org. That's what I'm going to do here. Yeah, so I don't know if there was an identifiable group of people that held beliefs that there was nothing. But
Now,
in his Ikrim, in his principles, he does, and also in the foundations of Torah, when in the codes, he does list people who he calls them heretics if they deny any of those principles of faith. So they would be covered and considered heretics if.
Yeah, but there's no punishments involved. You're not getting
they
lashes,
don't
you're
get the
not getting
world to come. I mean, they wouldn't get the world to come.
Maybe.
Well, that's what he says. I mean, in that category, I mean, the Gemara, the Gemara lists the people that don't have a place in the world to come, and in that list are people who deny some of those ikrim. So I don't remember the language he used when he spoke about it, but it was very strong language about anybody who fit into the category. I'm assuming that they fit into that category, that they don't have the place in the world to come.
Now, a foreign idolatrous city, do we have a command to an obligation to destroy it?
Well, we do have a demand to destroy all the idolatry. I don't think is there a command if they were amongst the 7 nations originally, there's a command to wipe out all the people, man, woman, and child. But if they're not part of the 7 nations and they're an idolatrous, just being an idolatrous city, I don't think so. No, you do have to destroy the idolatry, but you don't have to. As far as
but if it was a thing of what they call it, something humanist, or whatever they. So if you had a congregation of those sorts of people, they don't believe in God. They don't, So you're not going to have any problem.
It is one. I don't I don't know what they have to believe, because they, in the Noahide laws, you're not allowed to worship other idols, but it doesn't say. You're right. It doesn't talk. I know that, for instance, if like we even talked about whether a non-Jew is obliged to have a proper understanding of God's oneness. So is it possible that somebody could be considered a Noahide. But that doesn't mean that, not being a Noahide doesn't mean you're subject to being killed. But if you want it to be a Noahide, my understanding is, but I don't know how they get there. I don't remember how they get there, that you do have to have, you have to declare belief in the one God. But I don't remember how they got there. And that's just to be a Noahide. That's not necessarily to get you out of a state of having to be killed. There are rules that you're not supposed to show mercy. You're not supposed to show what would be called kindness.
Certainly not chain.
Kindness, right? Chain.
Certainly not.
And almost
Crane.
everybody agrees that is that includes idolaters, not just the 7 nations. But that's different than saying you have to kill them.
I know, but if you take a look at the Rambam himself, now he's basing, he speaks very approvingly of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, he was a great philosopher. He was no theologian. He had no conception of kedusha. Nevertheless, he doesn't seem to. There's a special, he didn't believe in God, but the Rambam doesn't seem to hold that against him.
Well, I don't know if there's any place where the Rambam declares that he's a Noahide, like a Noahide.
No, but he speaks very respectfully.
I mean, he speaks respectfully of his wisdom, not necessarily of his character.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so if you had a Gentile humanist, that's a good question. I don't know. If you have a Jewish humanist, then he would be categorized in that, in a time where we expect people to know better, and there's people that can teach.
What's a humanist? What's the humanist?
An atheist. In this case, it would mean secular humanists are atheists. So let's say you have a Jewish atheist. So in a time when this is a part of a modern discussion about this category, which is called Tinok Shenishba. There is a halachic category for people that are, let's say, worshiping idolatry, but they don't know better because they were kidnapped when they were little and they were raised into it. So let's say you have the children that were kept by the church and raised in the church, and then they became Christians. Let's say Christianity is idolatry. That's a matter of dispute, but let's say it is. So there's a category called Tinok Shenishba, which is a child that is captured, and that in the Talmud, that category is treated as a kind of special category. For instance, when they find out the truth and come back to their original practice of Judaism, they bring an offering, a sin offering, but they only bring one sin offering, even if they've had years of idolatry, etc. The entire circumstance is considered accidental, not something that was against their will, in that they were too young to express their will, and therefore they're not held fully liable for their behavior when it comes to idolatry. This has been extended also to heretics. So there, or at least there's a discussion about whether this category could be extended to heretics. There is an argument that nowadays everybody is in the category of a tinok shenishba, of a child that was kidnapped, in that general category, because we live in a generation where people are not exposed to genuine religious thought, genuine religious values in a way that would imprint on them. And so even if somebody grows up in an area where there are religious people and they are studying Torah, because it's not considered to be a time where there really are people who could be that kind of definitive model. And also, there aren't people that know how to rebuke properly. So even if somebody was doing something improper, when they're being told they're doing something improper, they're not being told by somebody who really is considered capable of a proper rebuke. So there are those who've already been suggesting in the last few generations that almost everybody is in this category and should be sort of forgiven for not knowing better and not practicing the Torah as it was meant to be practiced. This discussion has been applied to Jews who are not properly observing Torah, or would fit into a category of a heretic or a rebel against the Torah, etc. So these are categories that are not idolatry. They're a different category. They're not idolatry. This is a category of a kind of rebel against the Torah. Let's say somebody is violating the laws of Shabbos or the laws of the Yom Kippur, the laws of Passover, or things like that. Regularly, somebody who would violate these laws would, besides a punishment, would also be kind of excommunicated from the community. Their wine couldn't be touched. They're meant to, in a certain way, be treated almost like an idolater, a Gentile. So this category of tinok shenishba, of a child that was kidnapped, has been extended to that group by some. But there's a quote from, I think it's Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who was on the other side, who said, his quote was, "A nebuch apikoros is still an apikoros." And a nebuch means it's sad. They're in a sort of sorry state. Somebody's in a sorry or sad state. And so I feel pity because the person's in a sad or sorry state. So he was saying, like, it's appropriate to show pity, but at the same time, the fact that they have incorrect ideas or incorrect practices is something that would still would still have its effect. So he called it a nebuch apikoros. I will say that, let's just, for a second, since we're on this topic, I just want to see for a second here if we can find it quickly, then we'll look at this for a second.
Why would they have to kill the children if their children are just following what their parents tell them to do?
So regularly, you wouldn't. The case of the Ir Hanidachas, where they wipe out the man, they're supposed to wipe out the man, women, and children. that is a extreme, unusual case. The Talmud says there never was such a case and never will be, but it is on the books. Like Nebuch. Koros. Let's see if somebody. All right, I'm going to try this site. Yeshiva World, a lot of time, they're just having a thing, but maybe they have a link. All right, so this is from we're just using this because it looks like this guy's quoting things, so we'll just see what his quotes are. The Gemara in Sanhedrin 99a quotes Rav Hillel saying, "There shall be no Mashiach for Israel because they have already enjoyed him in the last days of Chizkiyahu." So the Gemara cites this as an opinion that Mashiach's not going to come anymore, which would be a violation of one of the principles of faith. And yet he seems to be a person in good standing. The Chassam Sofer writes that while Rav Hillel was not an apikoros for saying what he did, the question has already been decided, and anyone who says the exact same thing today is an apikoros who denies the Torah. Rav Elchanan brings the famous statement of Rav Chaim that Nebuch an apikoros is still an apikoros. And to this, so Rav Elchanan Wasserman is quoting Rav Chaim. Whether Rav Chaim actually ever wrote that, if it exists in writing, apparently it doesn't exist in any of his writing. But Rav Elchanan was a student of Rav Chaim. And he's quoting Rav Chaim. One is from a Gemara in Chelek in which Rav Hillel felt Mashiach came already in the form of Chizkiyahu Melech. According to Rav Chaim, why isn't Rav Hillel an apikoros? To this, Rav Meir Stern answered that since Rav Hillel was a bar plukta with other Amoraim, he had a right to argue, which means he has a right to disagree. He is part of a group of people who are making statements, learned, part of a learned argument. So there was a time where it wasn't decided that this should be considered one of the basic pillars of faith or not. He was arguing it shouldn't because he was arguing that Mashiach clearly has already come and he died, or he could have. That's according to him. But however, once the halacha was decided, subsequent generations can't argue. He compared this to any machlokas in halacha. Anytime there's a disagreement at the formulation of the law, you go via the majority. But while you're having the argument, obviously everybody's arguing their opinion. The people that represent the majority are not the only ones who get to argue when you're formulating the law. It's only once you've come to the conclusion. The Yachid himself doesn't have to go basar rov since he's a bar plukta. So he himself is allowed to disagree and maintain his disagreement, but the halacha is going to be decided by the majority. Rabbi J. David Bleich with Perfect Faith, Part 4. The concept of the Messiah is one example of fundamental principle of belief concerning which, at one point in history, there existed a legitimate divergence of opinion. since resolved normatively, the advancement of that opinion by one of the sages in the Talmud carried with it no theological odium. The explanation is quite simple. Before the authoritative formulation of the halacha with regard to this belief, Rav Hillel's opinion could be entertained. Following the resolution of the conflict in a matter which negates this theory, normative halacha demands acceptance of the belief that the redemption will be effected through the agency of a mortal Messiah. As is true with regard to other aspects of Jewish law, the Torah is not in heaven, and hence halachic disputes are resolved in accordance with the canons of law, which are themselves part of the law. Similarly, Rambam in Kisvei Ramban writes to the Gedolim, the great scholars of France, and argues with them against a belief in a corporeal Hashem. He writes that scriptural and agadic references to Hashem's form should not be taken literally, yet regardless of any of the Rishonim's belief in a corporeal God, such a belief today would be considered heretical. So we see, even in areas that are not halacha l'maisa, in other words, they're not about a practical halachic issue, but they're about a belief, one can be a heretic even if he finds a source in great people that once held it. It was okay for them to hold it, but not for us anymore. So when someone justifies their belief in some scientific way that contradicts our tradition, the same old opinion, they ought to consider the above. Okay, so that's that. Just wanted to see.
A resolution like that, though, I mean, generally we think of rabbinic resolutions as, in theory, they can be altered, but these seem not even in theory can they be altered.
Like you mean if a later Sanhedrin came and
the bigger and greater.
Well, so far, if they're saying that it's just treated like halacha, why should this be different? Yeah. So I wish I had a better source off the top. This is the one we looked at, right? I might not be spelling apikoros right, although they're spelling it this way. Apikoros. This is from Jewish Virtual Library. The sources for some of this information, they can come from a lot of different places. I think they say source Encyclopedia Judaica. All right, so apikoros, in popular usage, one who negates the rabbinic tradition. The designation apikoros first occurs in rabbinic literature in the Mishnah and Sanhedrin, enumerated among those who forfeit their share in the world to come. Although there's no doubt that the name is derived from the Greek, the rabbis seem to have been unaware or ignored the Greek origin of the word and took it to be connected with an Aramaic word, hefker. Whatever. See, etc. Also, Maimonides' introduction to the above Mishnah, which explicitly states it's an Aramaic word. They extended its meaning to refer generally to anyone who throws up the yoke of the commandments or who derides the Torah and its representatives. Thus, Korach, who according to the rabbis held up laws of Torah to ridicule, is referred to as an apikoros. The most extensive discussion is to be found in Sanhedrin 99b and 100a, where different Amoraim of the 3rd and 4th centuries apply the term variously to one who insults a scholar, who insults his neighbor in the presence of a scholar, who acts impudently toward the Torah, who jibes and says, what use are the rabbis to us? They study for their own benefit, or what use are the rabbis, since they never permitted us the raven nor forbade the dove? Cannot go beyond the dictum. Maimonides gave a more precise theological definition of the word distinguishing the apikoros from the min, the disbeliever and the apostate. He defines him as one who either denies prophecy and therefore the possibility of communication with God and man, or denies divine revelation, who denies the prophecy of Moses, who says that God has no knowledge of the deeds of man. Later authorities extended the meaning even further to include those who refuse obedience to the rabbis. In modern parlance, if properly used, anyone who expresses a view which is regarded not only as heretical, but even as heterodox. But here they say Maimonides includes in this list the disbeliever and the apostate. Oh, wait a second. Distinguish the apikoros from the sectarian min, the disbeliever and the apostates. He defines him as one who either denies prophecy, communion between God and man, denies divine revelation. But there is another category who's called the min, the disbeliever. So again, we'd have to go back to that discussion about where an atheist would fit in the sort of listing, the categorization. But we're looking backwards, trying to figure out where an atheist would fit. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there were atheists. You would assume that there would have to be, but there may not have been people that were atheists, or at least a community of people that were atheists in that time. I don't know. Do they have records of that? I know Socrates was sentenced to death for not believing in the gods, but I think he had a notion. I don't think he said that there was no such thing as gods, but it was more about a physical nature to the gods or idols. But I don't know for sure. This is not a subject I have any expertise on. But I'm assuming that looking back, you would apply these various criteria, and that an atheist would qualify for one of these categories, either a min or an apikoros, and whatever the rules are for the min and the apikoros would apply to them. And we did do it once in when we were doing the codes in Yesodei Torah, but I don't remember the specifics about it.
Rabbi, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I don't want you to spend time on something you don't want to spend time on, but I'm a little lost. Can you just summarize what we learned just now? Because
We have been
feel like-
talking about idolatry.
Mhm.
Been talking about we're talking about idolatry from a bunch of different angles and these negative commandments. If a Jew practices idolatry, there are laws in place. So, with witnesses and a proper warning, the person would be put to death if it was a Jew who worshipped worshipped idols. If you had an entire town, a Jewish town that worshipped idols, they would all have to be put to death. So there's this very strong punishments for Jews who worship idols. So the first question was, what if it's Gentiles who worship idols? Do these same laws apply to them? And then the question is, what if you have a Gentile atheist? What rules, if any, apply to them? And then if you have a Jewish atheist, what rules, if any, apply to them. So I was suggesting that the Mishnah identifies certain people who do not have a place in the world to come, and that some of the principles of faith are, in other words, if somebody denies some of those principles of faith, they might fit in one of these categories. So it could be that if you had a Jew who was an atheist, that this person would, because of particulars of their belief, not have a place in the world to come, which would be considered a punishment, to somebody. It wouldn't be a punishment by the court, by a human court, but it would be considered a punishment. I mentioned at the beginning that there is a very prominent halachic kind of school that suggests that nowadays, because we fit into this category of tinok shenishba, like a captured child, that somebody who declares himself an atheist may have no effect on what happens to them in the world to come. The thing is, the way people usually explain Reb Chaim's Neba HaBikurim thing is that the way it's usually explained, and this is a very subtle matter and deserves, a deeper treatment than I'm giving it right now. But just for our purposes, the way people explain Reb Chaim is that in order to get to Olam Haba, or to get to a stage where you have the status of a fully realized Jew, in order to get to that stage, you need to have the proper beliefs. If you don't have the proper beliefs, you can't get there. It doesn't matter why you don't have the proper beliefs. You just can't get there if you don't have the proper beliefs. So the fact that it's sad that this person doesn't have the proper beliefs, but what can you do? But it seems like my experience with halachic authorities is that they tend to rely on this other notion, which is that people nowadays are to be treated like a tinok shenishba, and the assumption is that that ultimately those, when there's discussion of punishments, or like the Mishnah talks about, you're not going to get a place in the world to come, they would not apply to people nowadays, because people nowadays are as if they were a kidnapped child. We don't know better, and it has to do with our upbringing and the generation that we live in, etc. But if you were treating it as the Mishnah treats it, there would be certain people that wouldn't get entree into the world to come because of either practices or certain declarations of belief that they've made. And so that's how we got to where we got to. So again, the stuff we're dealing with in the mitzvos is idolatry, not atheism. But in the broader discussion, atheism might, an attitude towards what could happen to atheists could sort of be deduced from some of this other stuff.
But it still seems to me that there was something special. There's something special about idolatry.
Sure.
You can say about, like a woman that you love. I don't know what that's coming. If she died, I could take it. But the fact that she married somebody else, there was somebody instead of me.
Right. You could definitely.
They're jealous.
Right. It's not that the, and certainly, but the only thing is, although that makes perfect sense, I would feel more comfortable if I knew that there was such a category as people who just didn't believe in any being. You'd think there would have to be, because it's such an obvious category now, but you just don't see discussions about it.
Well,
Yeah.
if this is derived, I missed a little of it, but if this is derived from thou shalt have no other gods before me, then it's, as David said, it's more about placing something else there than just, I'm not sure.
I agree.
If the whole idea of idolatry is.
Right.
Well, let's
Right,
ask the
but there's no overt discussion about, there's no mention of people who just deny without having another option or suggesting another option. So I agree that you would assume that, but it's possible there just there wasn't another group like that. So you didn't have to direct yourself. Like you could say that every time, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God. So if I'm an atheist, I'm denying I'm the Lord your God. But were there people who just did that and didn't pick anything else as their choice? I don't know. So the fact that the option's not mentioned doesn't mean that there wasn't such a group, but it also doesn't mean that if there was a group, they wouldn't deserve reference, right? That they're somehow not that bad. It can't make that deduction either. So
No.
I know this is discussed. This is for sure discussed. It's just I'm not right off the bat. I'm just not finding it. There's another search engine that somebody has suggested I start using. I used it a little bit yesterday. It's a very interesting one. It's called Perplexity, and it uses a powerful AI, and it has, one of the things it has is it'll cite the sources that it's drawing its information from. And it looks pretty interesting and creative. So maybe I'll get better at that, and I'll start finding more of what I'm looking for without having to. With Google, I'm very grateful to Google, but in situations like this, I didn't get what I wanted. It's still a bit of a fishing expedition. Okay, tomorrow we'll get back to our Rambam. But this was important. It was a good discussion. I wish I had. Maybe I'll have more information for us tomorrow about this. Okay. All right, be well. Thank you for your patience.
See you tonight.
Okay.